At 2:47 a.m. on March 15, 2015, the neon lights of Wynn Las Vegas Casino painted everything in electric blues and golds. The slot machines hummed their mechanical lullabies while the last determined players clung to their dreams of fortune. In the high roller section, 4 friends from California were living what they believed would be just another perfect night of their weekend getaway. Marcus Chen, 32, a Tesla software engineer with an infectious laugh, was teaching his girlfriend Sarah Williams, 28, how to play blackjack. Sarah, a marketing coordinator at the same company, kept giggling every time she lost a hand, her blonde hair catching the overhead lights as she leaned into Marcus's shoulder. At the adjacent table, David Rodriguez, 34, the group's unofficial leader and senior project manager, was methodically counting cards while his girlfriend Emma Thompson, 29, a design engineer, rolled her eyes at his mathematical approach to everything. They had driven from Palo Alto 3 days earlier in David's Tesla Model S, joking about getting the employee discount on charging stations along the way. This was their annual tradition. 4 co-workers who had become inseparable friends taking a long weekend to escape the Silicon Valley pressure cooker. They had booked adjoining suites on the 45th floor, with panoramic views of the Strip that made them feel like they owned the city. The casino floor buzzed with the energy of late-night gamblers, but their corner felt like a private bubble. Marcus was telling one of his elaborate stories about a coding bug that had taken him 3 weeks to solve, gesturing wildly with his drink. Sarah was documenting everything on her phone, as she always did. She was the group's unofficial photographer, capturing moments that seemed too perfect to be real. Emma, ever the practical one, kept checking her watch. "We should probably head up soon," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. David was on a winning streak, and she knew better than to interrupt when he was in the zone. He had that focused expression she recognized from their late nights at the Tesla office, when he would solve complex engineering problems that stumped everyone else. "One more hand," David said, sliding his chips forward. "I can feel it." The dealer, a middle-aged woman named Patricia who had been working the graveyard shift for 15 years, smiled at the familiar refrain. She had seen thousands of players make the same declaration, watched fortunes won and lost on the turn of a card. But there was something different about this group. They weren't desperate gamblers chasing losses. They were young, successful, genuinely happy, the kind of people who made her job enjoyable. Marcus ordered another round of drinks from the cocktail waitress, a petite brunette named Lisa, who had been serving them all evening. She knew their orders by heart now. Whiskey neat for David, Cosmopolitan for Emma, beer for Marcus, and white wine for Sarah. They tipped well and treated her with respect, unlike many of the high-roller clients who barely acknowledged her existence. The security cameras mounted discreetly in the ceiling captured every moment. Camera 47B showed Marcus laughing at something Sarah whispered in his ear. Camera 52A recorded David's methodical chip stacking. Camera 61C caught Emma checking her phone, probably reading work emails even on vacation. These would later become the most analyzed pieces of footage in Nevada state history. At 3:15 a.m., David finally pushed back from the table. He had won nearly $2,000, enough to cover their entire weekend expenses. "All right, I'm officially done," he announced, gathering his chips. "Emma's right. We should get some sleep before checkout tomorrow." They made their way toward the cashier's cage, walking through the maze of slot machines and poker tables. The casino's layout was designed to disorient, to make leaving as difficult as possible, but they navigated it with the confidence of people who had spent 3 nights learning every shortcut and secret passage. Sarah stopped at a vintage slot machine near the elevator bank, one of those old-fashioned one-armed bandits that looked like it belonged in a 1950s movie. "One last quarter," she said, fishing through her purse. "For luck." The machine's reels spun with mechanical precision, and 3 cherries lined up perfectly. Coins cascaded into the metal tray with a sound like metallic rain. Sarah squealed with delight, and Marcus scooped up the winnings, exactly $75 in quarters. "See?" Sarah said, beaming. "I told you it was lucky." They were still laughing about Sarah's jackpot when they reached the elevator bank. David pressed the call button, and they waited in the soft lighting of the marble-walled alcove. The elevator arrived with a gentle chime, its brass doors sliding open to reveal an empty car lined with mirrors and soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. As they stepped inside, none of them noticed the man in the dark suit who had been watching them from across the casino floor. He had been there all evening, nursing the same drink, his eyes never leaving their table. When the elevator doors closed, he pulled out his phone and made a brief call. The elevator climbed smoothly toward the 45th floor, carrying 4 friends who were already planning their next adventure. Emma was suggesting they visit Napa Valley for wine tasting. Marcus wanted to try skydiving. David was researching hiking trails in Yosemite. Sarah was just happy to have 3 more days off work. At 3:22 a.m., the elevator reached their floor. The hallway was empty, carpeted in deep burgundy with gold accents lit by crystal sconces that cast warm shadows on the walls. Their rooms were at the end of the corridor, numbers 4547 and 4549. With connecting doors they had requested specifically. David slid his keycard into the lock of room 4547. The light flashed green, and he pushed the door open, holding it for Emma. Marcus and Sarah were already at their door, fumbling with their keycard and giggling about something. "Breakfast at 10?" David called out. "Make it 11, Marcus replied. "Some of us need our beauty sleep." Those were the last words any of them would ever speak to each other. The housekeeping staff at Wynn, Las Vegas discovered the first sign that something was wrong at 1:30 p.m. on March 16th. Maria Gonzalez, a veteran housekeeper who had worked at the hotel for 12 years, knocked on the door of room 4547 for the 3rd time. Checkout had been at noon, but the Do Not Disturb signs were still hanging on both doors and there had been no response to her calls. Using her master key, Maria entered the room cautiously. The beds were unmade but appeared to have been slept in. Personal belongings were scattered around. Emma's laptop was open on the desk, still logged into her Tesla work email. David's wallet lay on the nightstand next to his watch, an expensive Rolex his father had given him for his promotion. In the bathroom, 2 toothbrushes sat in a glass, and Emma's makeup was arranged neatly on the marble counter. Room 4549 told the same story. Sarah's camera equipment was spread across the dresser, her professional-grade Canon still attached to its tripod by the window. Marcus's Tesla employee badge was clipped to a shirt hanging in the closet. Their suitcases were packed but not zipped, as if they had been preparing to leave but never finished. Hotel security was called immediately. James Morrison, head of security for the past 8 years, had seen his share of unusual situations, but this felt different. Guests didn't just vanish, leaving behind wallets, phones, and expensive electronics. He pulled the security footage from the previous night, starting from when the 4 friends had returned to their floor. The cameras showed them entering their respective rooms at 3:22 a.m. David and Emma disappeared into 4547, while Marcus and Sarah entered 4549. But here's where the mystery deepened. The hallway cameras never showed them leaving. Morrison checked every angle, every timestamp. The emergency stairwell cameras showed no activity. The elevator logs indicated no trips from the 45th floor after 3:22 a.m. until the morning shift began. By 4 p.m., the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was involved. Detective Rachel Torres, a 15-year veteran who specialized in missing persons cases, arrived at the hotel with her partner, Detective Mike Sullivan. They had handled everything from runaway teenagers to elaborate insurance fraud schemes. But 4 adults vanishing simultaneously from a secured hotel floor was unprecedented. The investigation expanded rapidly. Phone records showed that none of the 4 had made or received calls after 2:15 a.m., when Sarah had briefly called her sister in San Diego to share a photo of her slot machine win. Credit card activity ceased entirely after David's final transaction at the casino cashier at 3:18 a.m. Their Tesla Model S was still in the hotel's valet parking, untouched since their arrival. Back in Palo Alto, the families were living through their worst nightmare. Marcus's mother, Linda Chen, had been expecting her son's usual Sunday night call. When it didn't come, she initially assumed he was just having too much fun to remember. But when Monday morning arrived and Marcus didn't show up for work, her concern turned to panic. Sarah's parents, Robert and Jennifer Williams, drove immediately to Las Vegas when the police called. They sat in the hotel lobby, clutching Sarah's favorite childhood stuffed animal, a small elephant named Peanut that she had carried everywhere until she was 12. Jennifer kept checking her phone, hoping for a text message that never came. Emma's sister, Claire Thompson, flew in from Seattle. She was a nurse practitioner trained to handle crises, but nothing had prepared her for this. She walked through Emma's hotel room, touching her sister's belongings, trying to understand how someone could simply disappear from a locked room 45 floors above the ground. David's father, Miguel Rodriguez, was a retired police officer from San Jose. He understood investigations, protocols, evidence collection, but understanding the process didn't make the waiting any easier. He spent hours studying the hotel blueprints, looking for hidden passages or service corridors that might explain how 4 people could vanish without a trace. The Tesla family rallied around their missing employees. CEO Elon Musk personally called the families, offering the company's full resources for the search effort. Private investigators were hired. A reward fund was established. Missing person flyers with 4 smiling faces were distributed across Nevada, California, and Arizona. Detective Torres interviewed everyone who had interacted with the group during their stay. Patricia, the blackjack dealer, remembered them clearly. They were polite, happy, obviously close friends. Lisa, the cocktail waitress, described them as the kind of customers she enjoyed serving. The valet who had parked their car, the concierge who had recommended restaurants, the spa attendant who had scheduled Emma's massage. Everyone had the same impression of 4 normal, successful young people enjoying a weekend getaway. The casino's surveillance system was the most sophisticated in Las Vegas, with cameras covering every angle of every floor. But somehow, 4 people had managed to disappear from one of the most monitored buildings in the world. The footage was analyzed frame by frame, enhanced, slowed down, examined by FBI specialists. Nothing. Theories emerged and were discarded. Had they been kidnapped? But there was no ransom demand, no sign of struggle, no evidence they had ever left their rooms. Had they staged their own disappearance? But they had left behind everything valuable, including David's Rolex and Sarah's expensive camera equipment. Had they fallen victim to some elaborate casino scheme? But Wynn Las Vegas had too much to lose to risk such a scandal. Weeks turned into months. The families took turns traveling to Las Vegas, meeting with investigators, following up on tips that led nowhere. Marcus's mother started a Facebook page called Bring Them Home that attracted thousands of followers. Sarah's father appeared on local news programs pleading for information. Emma's sister organized search parties that combed the desert around Las Vegas, looking for any sign of the missing friends. The Tesla office in Palo Alto felt their absence acutely. 4 empty desks in the engineering department served as daily reminders of the mystery. Their colleagues organized fundraisers, hired additional private investigators, and kept their projects alive in case they returned. The company offered extended leave to any employee who wanted to join the search efforts. Detective Torres worked the case obsessively, following every lead no matter how remote. She interviewed hundreds of people, reviewed thousands of hours of surveillance footage from hotels and businesses throughout Las Vegas. She consulted with experts in everything from human trafficking to witness protection programs. But after 6 months, she had to admit what everyone feared. The trail had gone completely cold. The families refused to give up hope. They established a foundation in the 4 friends' names, dedicated to helping other families of missing persons. They lobbied for improved hotel security protocols and better coordination between law enforcement agencies. But privately, in their darkest moments, they began to accept that they might never see their loved ones again. The case remained open, but active investigation gradually wound down. The hotel rooms were eventually cleaned and rented to new guests. The Tesla Model S was returned to the company. Personal belongings were given to the families, who treasured every item as a connection to the people they had lost. 3 years passed. The families learned to live with the uncertainty, the endless questions, the absence of closure. They marked birthdays and holidays with empty chairs and unspoken grief. The case file grew thick with reports and theories, but no closer to answers. And then, in the summer of 2018, a routine patrol in the Nevada desert would change everything. Officer Jake Martinez had been patrolling the remote highways of Clark County for 8 years, but he had never seen his K-9 partner Rex react like this before. It was July 23, 2018, a scorching Tuesday afternoon when the temperature gauge in his patrol car read 114 degrees Fahrenheit. He had pulled over to check on a reported abandoned vehicle near mile marker 47 on State Route 160, about 80 kilometers southwest of Las Vegas. The vehicle turned out to be a false alarm, just a broken-down RV whose owners had already been picked up by the ALAA. But as Martinez was preparing to leave, Rex began exhibiting behavior he had only seen during their search and rescue training. The German Shepherd was pulling toward a cluster of Joshua trees about 200 yards from the highway. whining and pawing at the ground with an urgency that made Martinez's instincts kick in. "What is it, boy?" Martinez asked, following Rex's lead across the desert terrain. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving. Scattered rocks, thorny vegetation, and sand that seemed to absorb all sound except the distant hum of highway traffic. Rex led him past a rusted water tank, around a formation of red sandstone, and toward what appeared to be the remains of an old mining operation. Hidden behind a natural rock formation stood a weathered two-story structure that looked like it hadn't been occupied in decades. The wood siding was bleached gray by years of desert sun, and several windows were boarded up with plywood that had warped and cracked. A faded sign near the entrance read, "Desert Rose Mining Company, Eston, 1952." Though most of the letters had been worn away by wind and sand. Rex was becoming increasingly agitated, circling the building and barking in short, sharp bursts. Martinez called for backup and approached the structure cautiously. The front door hung askew on rusted hinges, and the smell that hit him when he stepped inside made him immediately understand why Rex had been so persistent. The interior was a time capsule of abandonment. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that penetrated through gaps in the boarded windows. Old mining equipment lay scattered around the first floor. Pickaxes, lanterns, and wooden crates that had been gnawed by desert rodents. A staircase led to the second floor, its wooden steps creaking ominously under Martinez's weight. It was in the largest room on the second floor that Martinez made the discovery that would finally provide answers to a 3-year-old mystery. 4 wooden chairs sat in the center of the room, arranged in a rough circle. Each chair contained the skeletal remains of a human being, and each set of remains was secured to the chair with what appeared to be rope that had deteriorated over time, but still held the basic positioning. Martinez immediately backed out of the room and called for the Clark County Coroner's Office and the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Within 2 hours, the abandoned mining building was swarming with investigators, forensic specialists, and crime scene technicians. Detective Rachel Torres arrived at the scene at 4:30 p.m., 3 years and 4 months after she had first walked through those hotel rooms at Wynn, Las Vegas. She had never stopped thinking about the case, never stopped wondering what had happened to Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and David. Now, standing in this desolate building in the middle of nowhere, she felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness. The forensic team worked methodically, photographing everything before disturbing any evidence. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the county's chief medical examiner, supervised the careful removal of the remains. Each skeleton was photographed in position, then carefully transported to the coroner's office for detailed analysis. The room itself told a story of abandonment and isolation. Thick dust covered everything except the immediate area around the chairs, suggesting the scene had been undisturbed for years. There were no signs of recent human activity, no footprints, no disturbed dust patterns, no evidence that anyone had visited this place since the remains had been left here. Personal effects found at the scene provided the first concrete evidence linking these remains to the missing Tesla employees. A Tesla employee badge, weathered but still readable, bore Marcus Chen's name and photo. A distinctive silver bracelet that Emma Thompson's sister had described in detail was found near one of the chairs. Sarah Williams' camera, the expensive Canon she had been so proud of, sat on a wooden crate near the window, its memory card still intact. But it was David Rodriguez's Rolex watch that provided the most chilling detail. The watch had stopped at 4:17 a.m. on March 16, 2015, less than an hour after the 4 friends had been seen entering their hotel rooms for the last time. The forensic analysis would take weeks, but preliminary examination suggested the remains had been in the desert building for approximately 3 years, consistent with the timeline of the disappearance. There were no obvious signs of trauma to the bones, no bullet holes or fractures that would indicate violence. The positioning suggested the individuals had been restrained, but not necessarily harmed before their passing. Detective Torres stood in the doorway of that room, trying to piece together how 4 people had traveled from a luxury hotel suite to this abandoned building in the middle of the Nevada desert. The logistics seemed impossible. The building was accessible only by a rough dirt road that branched off from the highway about 5 miles back. Someone would have needed detailed knowledge of the area to even know this place existed. The investigation team expanded their search of the building and surrounding area. In a smaller room on the first floor, they found evidence of recent habitation. Empty water bottles, food containers, and a sleeping bag that appeared much newer than the rest of the building's contents. Someone had been using this place as a temporary shelter, though there was no way to determine when or for how long. Outside the building, tire tracks in the hard-packed sand were too weathered to provide useful information, but they suggested that vehicles had accessed this location multiple times over the years. A search of the surrounding desert revealed nothing else of significance, just the endless expanse of Joshua trees, rocks, and sand that stretched toward the distant mountains. As news of the discovery spread, the families of the 4 missing friends experienced a complex mixture of emotions. After 3 years of uncertainty, they finally had answers, but not the answers they had hoped for. The confirmation that their loved ones were gone forever was devastating, but it also provided a form of closure that had been absent for so long. Marcus's mother, Linda Chen, flew to Las Vegas immediately upon hearing the news. She stood outside the Desert Rose mining building, looking at the place where her son had spent his final hours, trying to understand how a weekend vacation had led to this remote and desolate location. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had 4 people been transported from a secured hotel to an abandoned building 80 kilometers away without leaving any trace? Who had known about this remote location? And most importantly, who was responsible for bringing them here? Detective Torres knew that finding the remains was only the beginning. Now the real investigation could start, one that would delve into the darker corners of Las Vegas, where tourists disappeared and questions were met with silence. The desert had finally given up its secret, but the truth behind that secret remained buried deeper than any grave. The forensic team worked until well after sunset, their portable lights casting eerie shadows on the walls of the old mining building. As they carefully documented every detail of the scene, Rex sat patiently beside Officer Martinez's patrol car, having completed the most important search of his career. In the distance, the lights of Las Vegas glittered like fallen stars, a reminder of the glittering world the 4 friends had left behind for this final, terrible destination. The forensic analysis took 6 weeks to complete, but when Dr. Patricia Hoffman delivered her findings to Detective Torres on September 4, 2018, the results painted a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. The 4 individuals had not suffered violent ends. Toxicology reports showed traces of a powerful sedative in the bone marrow, suggesting they had been unconscious when they arrived at the Desert Rose mining building. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team. This wasn't a crime of passion or a random act of violence. Someone had carefully planned and executed the disappearance of 4 people from one of the most secure buildings in Las Vegas, transported them across the desert while they were unconscious, and left them in a location so remote that it had taken 3 years for their remains to be discovered. Detective Torres assembled a task force that included FBI specialists in organized crime and human trafficking. The case had evolved from a missing persons investigation into something far more complex and sinister. The methodical nature of the crime suggested professional involvement, someone with resources, knowledge, and connections that extended far beyond typical criminal activity. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah Williams's camera, found at the scene, contained a memory card that had somehow survived 3 years in the desert environment. The forensic computer specialists at the FBI lab in Quantico worked for days to recover the corrupted data, and what they found changed the entire direction of the investigation. The last photos on Sarah's camera weren't taken at the casino. They were taken inside what appeared to be a service elevator, showing the faces of 2 men in dark suits who were clearly not hotel employees. The timestamp showed 3:31 a.m. on March 16th, 9 minutes after the 4 friends had supposedly entered their hotel rooms for the last time. The images were grainy and partially corrupted, but facial recognition software identified one of the men as Vincent Castellano, a known associate of organized crime families with connections throughout Nevada and California. Castellano had a record of involvement in illegal gambling operations, money laundering, and what the FBI euphemistically called debt collection services. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of Las Vegas's hospitality industry. The 4 Tesla employees had unknowingly stumbled into something much larger than a weekend gambling trip. David Rodriguez's methodical card counting, which the group had laughed about as harmless fun, had actually been flagged by the casino's sophisticated surveillance system as potential professional gambling. But it wasn't David's card counting that had sealed their fate. It was what Marcus Chen had discovered on his laptop while reviewing work emails in his hotel room. As a software engineer specializing in financial systems, Marcus had noticed irregularities in some Tesla's payment processing that suggested money laundering through casino transactions. He had been planning to report his findings to Tesla's compliance department when they returned to California. The hotel's internal security had been compromised. James Morrison, the head of security who had initially investigated the disappearance, had been feeding information to Castellanos' organization for over 2 years. The Do Not Disturb signs that had delayed the discovery of the empty rooms hadn't been placed by the guests. They had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to buy time. The service elevator that Sarah had photographed was the key to understanding how 4 people had vanished from a secured floor. The elevator had a maintenance override that bypassed the normal security protocols, allowing access to service areas and loading docks that weren't monitored by the main surveillance system. Morrison had provided the access codes and ensured that the relevant cameras experienced technical difficulties during the crucial time window. FBI agents arrested Morrison at his home in Henderson on September 15th. Faced with evidence of his involvement and the prospect of federal charges, he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. His confession revealed the full scope of the operation and the tragic sequence of events that had led to the deaths of 4 innocent people. According to Morrison's statement, the plan had never been to harm the Tesla employees. They were supposed to be held until Marcus could be convinced to delete his findings and forget what he had discovered. The abandoned mining building had been used as a temporary holding facility for people who had become inconvenient to certain business interests. But something had gone wrong. The sedative used to keep the 4 friends unconscious during transport had been administered incorrectly. Instead of keeping them asleep for a few hours, it had caused respiratory depression that proved fatal. By the time Castellanos' associates had arrived at the Desert Rose building to begin negotiations, they found 4 bodies instead of 4 hostages. Faced with a situation that had spiraled completely out of control, the organization had made the decision to simply leave the bodies where they were and hope they would never be discovered. The remote location, accessible only to those who knew about the old mining operations, seemed like the perfect place to hide their mistake. The families of Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and David received the news of Morrison's confession with a mixture of relief and rage. Finally, they had answers about what had happened to their loved ones. But knowing that 4 young people had died because of a corporate security breach and a botched kidnapping attempt made their grief even more difficult to bear. Linda Chen, Marcus's mother, spoke at a press conference outside the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police headquarters. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she read from a prepared statement. "My son was a good person who worked hard and tried to do the right thing. He discovered something wrong and was planning to report it. He died because he had integrity." The Tesla Corporation issued a statement expressing their commitment to justice and announcing a comprehensive review of their financial security protocols. The company also established a memorial fund in honor of the 4 employees, dedicated to supporting families of crime victims and improving corporate whistleblower protections. Vincent Castellano was arrested 3 days after Morrison's confession, found hiding in a warehouse in North Las Vegas. 2 other associates were taken into custody in California and Arizona. The FBI's investigation revealed that the organization had been using similar tactics for years, targeting individuals who had inadvertently discovered their money laundering operations. But for the families, no amount of justice could bring back the 4 friends who had simply wanted to enjoy a weekend together. They had been planning to attend Emma's wedding the following month, to celebrate Marcus's promotion, to take a group trip to Europe for Sarah's 30th birthday. Instead, they were planning funerals and trying to find meaning in a senseless tragedy. Detective Torres stood once again in the Desert Rose mining building, now empty and silent, except for the wind whistling through the gaps in the boarded windows. The chairs had been removed as evidence, but she could still see the impressions in the dust where they had sat for 3 years. 4 bright lives had ended in this desolate place, victims of greed and corruption they had never even known existed. As she walked back to her car, Torres reflected on the randomness of evil and the fragility of the ordinary moments that people take for granted. A weekend trip, a lucky slot machine, a work email checked at the wrong time. Such small things that had led to such devastating consequences. The desert wind picked up, scattering sand across the abandoned building and erasing the last traces of the investigation. But the memory of what had happened here would remain, a reminder that sometimes the most innocent actions can have the most tragic consequences. The trial of Vincent Castellano and his associates began on February 14, 2019, in the United States District Court for the District of Nevada. The date was grimly ironic, Valentine's Day, a celebration of love, marking the beginning of legal proceedings for 4 people who had died simply because they loved each other enough to take a vacation together. Federal prosecutor Amanda Richardson had built her case methodically over 6 months, weaving together financial records, surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and Morrison's detailed confession. The prosecution's narrative was clear. Marcus Chen had discovered a sophisticated money laundering operation that used casino transactions to clean millions of dollars in illegal proceeds. His planned report to Tesla's compliance department would have triggered federal investigations that could have dismantled years of carefully constructed criminal enterprise. The defense attorneys argued that their clients had never intended for anyone to die, that the deaths were accidental results of a kidnapping plan gone wrong. But Richardson countered that the moment they had decided to abduct 4 innocent people, they had accepted responsibility for whatever consequences followed. The families attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row of the courtroom gallery. Linda Chen wore a small pin with Marcus's photo on her lapel. Robert and Jennifer Williams held hands throughout the proceedings, drawing strength from each other as they listened to the details of their daughter's final hours. Emma's sister Claire took detailed notes, as if documenting every word could somehow bring her sister back. David's father Miguel sat with the rigid posture of his police training, his jaw clenched as he watched the men responsible for his son's death. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the medical examiner, who explained in clinical detail how the 4 friends had died. The sedative used, a veterinary-grade anesthetic typically used for large animals, had been administered in doses calculated for much larger body weights. The victims had simply stopped breathing while unconscious, unaware of their fate. James Morrison took the stand on the trial's 8th day, his voice barely above a whisper as he described his role in the conspiracy. He had been recruited by Castellano's organization 3 years earlier, when gambling debts had made him desperate for additional income. What had started as simply looking the other way during certain transactions had gradually escalated to active participation in criminal activities. "I never thought anyone would get hurt," Morrison testified, his eyes fixed on his hands. "They told me it would just be a conversation, that they needed to talk to the guy who had been asking questions. I thought they would be back in their rooms by morning." The prosecution presented evidence that Morrison had received over $200,000 in payments from the criminal organization over 2 years. The money had paid for his daughter's college tuition, his wife's medical treatments, and a lifestyle that his security guard salary could never have supported. But the cost of that money had ultimately been 4 innocent lives. Vincent Castellano never took the stand in his own defense. He sat throughout the trial with the expression of a man who had calculated risks his entire life and accepted that sometimes those calculations proved wrong. His attorney argued that Castellano was merely a middle manager in a larger organization, following orders from superiors who would never be identified or prosecuted. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: conspiracy, kidnapping resulting in death, money laundering, and racketeering. Castellano was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His 2 associates received sentences of 35 and 40 years respectively. Morrison, in exchange for his cooperation, received 25 years in federal prison. But the legal proceedings were only part of the story's conclusion. The families had spent 4 years seeking not just justice, but meaning in their devastating loss. They found it in the Marcus Chen Foundation, established to support corporate whistleblower protections and provide resources for families of crime victims. The Foundation's first major initiative was lobbying for federal legislation requiring enhanced security protocols for employees who report financial irregularities. The Tesla 4 Act, as it became known, mandated protection programs for corporate whistleblowers and established severe penalties for retaliating against employees who reported suspected criminal activity. Sarah Williams' photography equipment, recovered from the Desert Rose mining building, was donated to a community college in Las Vegas, where her parents established a scholarship program for students studying digital media. Her camera, the Canon that had captured the faces of her killers, was displayed in the college's memorial gallery alongside examples of her work from happier times. Emma Thompson's engineering designs, found on her laptop in the hotel room, were completed posthumously by her Tesla colleagues and incorporated into the company's next generation of vehicles. A small plaque in the Tesla Design Center reads, "In memory of Emma Thompson, engineer, innovator, friend. Her ideas live on." I see. David Rodriguez's methodical approach to problem-solving inspired his father to return to police work as a consultant, specializing in cold cases. Miguel Rodriguez spent his retirement years helping other families find answers, using the investigative skills that had been sharpened by his own family's tragedy. The Wynn Las Vegas casino implemented new security protocols following the investigation, including enhanced background checks for all security personnel and redundant surveillance systems that couldn't be easily compromised. The hotel also established a victim assistance fund and partnered with the Marcus Chen Foundation to support crime victim advocacy programs. Detective Rachel Torres was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to head a new task force focused on crimes involving the hospitality industry. She kept a photo of the 4 Tesla employees on her desk, not as a reminder of failure, but as motivation to ensure that other families wouldn't endure the same uncertainty and loss. The Desert Rose mining building was demolished in the summer of 2020, its weathered wood and rusted metal finally succumbing to the desert that had hidden its secrets for so long. In its place, the families planted 4 Joshua trees, their twisted branches reaching toward the endless Nevada sky like arms raised in eternal friendship. On March 15th each year, the anniversary of their disappearance, the families gather at those trees for a private memorial service. They share stories about Marcus's terrible jokes, Sarah's infectious enthusiasm, Emma's practical wisdom, and David's quiet leadership. They talk about the trips that were never taken, the promotions that were never celebrated, the weddings and children and grandchildren that will never be. But they also talk about the legislation that has protected other whistleblowers, the scholarships that have helped other students, the cold cases that have been solved because of the investigative techniques developed during their search for answers. 4 lives that ended too soon had somehow managed to save others, to create meaning from meaningless tragedy. The last entry in Sarah Williams's journal, found in her hotel room, had been written on March 14, 2015. "Perfect day with perfect friends. Sometimes I think we're the luckiest people in the world." In a way, perhaps they were, not because of how their story ended, but because of how it continued, in the love of the families who refused to let them be forgotten, in the laws that protected others from similar fates, and in the simple truth that some friendships are strong enough to survive even death. The desert wind still blows across the place where the Desert Rose mining building once stood, but now it carries the whisper of Joshua tree branches and the promise that some stories, no matter how they end, never really finish. They just transform into something larger than themselves, something that ensures the people we love remain with us long after they're gone. 4 friends had disappeared into the Nevada desert, but their legacy would endure forever in the lives they had touched and the changes they had inspired. Sometimes the most profound impact comes not from how we live, but from how others choose to honor the way we lived.